Cambricon just reported a 453% revenue surge and became, reportedly, the first Chinese artificial intelligence chip company to turn a profit. Not a lab project, not a government showcase, an actual business making money in the world's fastest-growing artificial intelligence market. The accepted wisdom was that no Chinese firm had cracked the commercial artificial intelligence accelerator space, that the design gap was simply too large, the software too immature, the ecosystem too fragile. That assumption is now obsolete. But here's what makes this interesting. The story isn't about who built the faster chip. It's about who can actually ship enough of them. And that question has a much harder answer. Think about what a 453% revenue jump means in context. The base was small. Cambricon was not a hyperscale supplier before this run. But the direction and the profit status together signal something the base number alone doesn't capture. This is a real business turn, not a rounding error on a government contract. Buyers are paying real money. The order book is growing. And the company has announced a plan to triple output. Plant that plan in your mind because the constraint that makes it genuinely difficult has nothing to do with the chip design and everything to do with where the chips get made. There's a second question worth holding. Nvidia still dominates China's artificial intelligence accelerator market. So, why hasn't it moved to simply crush Cambricon the way dominant players usually respond to a fast-rising rival? That answer is coming, and it changes how you read the whole race. To understand how Cambricon got here, you have to understand what changed in the market around it. For years, Nvidia's products, particularly the H100, the chip that became the backbone of large-scale artificial intelligence training globally, were freely available inside China. Then, the United States Commerce Department moved, first restricting the H100 in 2022, then extending controls to the H800 in 2023. That left a vacuum at exactly the tier where Chinese hyperscalers and government-linked data centers were scaling their workloads. The vacuum wasn't aspirational, it was structural. Those buyers had to qualify something. Cambricon's MLU series targets inference workloads and mid-tier training, not the frontier model training that the H100 dominated, but the enormous middle of the market where most real artificial intelligence deployment happens. Think of it this way. Cambricon is not trying to beat Nvidia on the open highway. It's competing on a closed circuit where Nvidia's fastest cars have been banned from the starting grid. The lap times don't need to be equal. They just need to be good enough to finish the race and good enough to make buyers comfortable qualifying the hardware into their production stacks. Nvidia did produce a compliant replacement, the H20, deliberately throttled to pass export rules. But throttled is the operative word. The H20 cannot match the H100 class performance that serious training workloads require, which means buyers who need serious compute are still underserved by what Nvidia can legally offer. Cambricon is filling that gap, not competing with the peak Nvidia no longer offers. That's also why Nvidia hasn't made a decisive move to crush Cambricon. The markets don't fully overlap. The H20 is Nvidia's compliant product for China, and the tiers where Cambricon is winning are precisely the tiers the H20 leaves underserved. For now, these are different lanes. So how did Cambricon actually get to profitability? Raw performance is part of it, but it isn't the whole story. Getting to profit in this market requires that buyers can actually deploy your hardware, which means driver support, compiler tool chains, and integration with the artificial intelligence frameworks their teams are already using. Cambricon has invested in what it calls the Neuware software stack, the layer that lets workloads move from framework code down to the MLU hardware. Chinese artificial intelligence frameworks, including Baidu's PaddlePaddle and Huawei's MindSpore, have been building or reporting compatibility with Cambricon's chips, though the depth and completeness of that integration at production scale isn't fully confirmed in the public record. Here's the analogy that makes this legible. A car that does 180 miles per hour is useless if the local road network only accepts a fuel it doesn't take. Cambricon built the fuel network, the software tooling, that lets Chinese customers actually run their workloads on MLU hardware. That's what converts a competitive chip into a deployable product. And a deployable product, in a market where alternatives are export controlled out of reach, is a profitable product. Is this a technological win? That depends which tier you're asking about. At the mid-tier inference and training workloads Cambricon targets, the honest answer is increasingly competitive. At the frontier training tier, the work that builds the largest models, the gap to Nvidia's H100 class hardware remains large and largely uncontested. Cambricon didn't beat Nvidia. It found the floor Nvidia vacated and built a business on it. That's not a small thing, but it is a specific thing, and the specificity matters. Now, let's be precise about the numbers, because the 453% figure deserves some scrutiny before we build too much on it. The revenue base before the surge was small. The exact starting figure isn't confirmed in the public record, so we can't calculate what 453% actually represents in absolute terms. The profitability milestone is reported from company financial disclosures, the kind that get audited for a listed company, but the full independent audit trail isn't available in what's publicly accessible. The margin and the absolute profit size aren't confirmed at the level needed to call this a durable, large-scale business. And the tripling output plan is a stated company target, not a confirmed supply agreement. Treat the profit as real, but early stage. Treat the tripling as an intention, because what it runs into is not a design problem, it's a foundry problem. This is the pit stop. And it's where the race gets genuinely interesting. Cambricon's most competitive chips require SMIC's most advanced fabrication process. SMIC, China's leading domestic foundry, has developed what it markets as a roughly 7 nanometer class process, designated N+1 and N+2. Teardown analysis from firms that have physically examined chips produced on this process shows that the actual transistor density falls short of what TSMC produces at a comparable marketing label, meaning SMIC's 7 nanometer class delivers less performance per area than TSMC's equivalent, because the manufacturing technique is fundamentally different. The reason is not ambiguous. SMIC does not have access to the extreme ultraviolet lithography machines made by ASML that TSMC uses to print the most advanced chip geometries. Export restrictions from the United States and the Netherlands have blocked that equipment from reaching China. Without extreme ultraviolet lithography, SMIC is doing sophisticated engineering to approach advanced nodes through alternative methods. And it's genuinely impressive engineering, but it hits a physical wall that the equipment itself imposes. The capacity this process produces is finite, and it is shared. Huawei's Kirin 9000S, the chip in Huawei's domestic smartphones, itself a major strategic priority, is produced on SMIC's advanced node. Every wafer start allocated to Huawei is a wafer start not going to Cambricon. Every wafer start Cambricon needs to triple its output is a wafer start competing with other Chinese national priorities that have their own political weight. Imagine you've built the fastest car on the circuit, but the only fuel supplier in the country has a fixed daily output, and 3 other cars are already in line ahead of you. You can announce that you want to triple your laps. You cannot triple the fuel. Can SMIC simply build more capacity? Eventually, maybe. But semiconductor fabrication expansion doesn't happen in quarters. It takes years and billions of dollars in capital expenditure. And without extreme ultraviolet lithography, the yield improvements SMIC can achieve at leading-edge nodes hit a ceiling the equipment imposes. Not one engineering alone can push through. SMIC is working to expand, but the timeline for meaningful capacity growth does not match a near-term tripling of Cambricon's shipped volume. That gap between the stated target and the available supply is the constraint no performance improvement can outrun. This is the pit stop nobody announced. The tripling plan is public. The foundry allocation problem is structural. And the two things are in direct collision. Pull back from Cambricon specifically, and the pattern becomes the real story. 3 years ago, the dominant narrative about China's artificial intelligence chip ecosystem was that the design gap was insurmountable, that Chinese firms couldn't build a chip competitive enough to matter commercially. Cambricon's profitability has made that narrative obsolete, at least at the mid-tier. The design gap has narrowed significantly. That's the race Cambricon just finished. The race it's now in is different. The circuit surface is foundry capacity. The competitive advantage isn't architecture anymore, it's wafer starts. And on that circuit, Nvidia is running a completely different kind of car. Nvidia's supply chain runs through TSMC, which operates extreme ultraviolet lithography at scale, faces no equivalent capacity ceiling, and serves a global customer base that gives it negotiating leverage and production volume no Chinese foundry currently approaches. Nvidia doesn't have a pit stop problem. Its car just keeps lapping. Reports and analysts tracking this market suggest that Cambricon's revenue and order book will likely continue growing over the next 12 months. The demand is real, the product is deployable, the market is captive. But the delivered unit volume will be throttled by what SMIC can actually allocate. Profitable and rising, yes. Volume capped at the foundry floor, also yes. That's the most honest near-term picture available from what the evidence shows. And Nvidia's dominance in terms of sheer available chips, its volume advantage, is not a strategic choice to ignore Cambricon. It's a structural consequence of where each company's hardware gets made. Cambricon is winning a market Nvidia can't fully enter. But it isn't yet threatening Nvidia's global position, because the volume ceiling means the market it wins is inherently constrained in size. Here's my honest read. The people who say Cambricon is already breaking Nvidia's grip on China's artificial intelligence market are wrong. The volume gap is structural and it's large, and no engineering milestone closes it without SMIC's capacity expanding in ways that aren't happening on a near-term timeline. But the people who say this is all subsidized noise, a government-backed also-ran that doesn't threaten anyone, are also wrong. A first profit in a real market with real buyers is not noise. A 453% revenue surge off a small base is not noise. The design capability at the mid-tier is real and it's growing. What's actually happening is that China has finished one race and started a harder one. The design gap is no longer the story. The foundry floor is. So, here's what I genuinely want to know from you. Does the design milestone matter more right now? The fact that China now has a profitable artificial intelligence chip company for the first time, that the question of whether anyone could build a viable domestic alternative has been answered, or does the SMIC ceiling matter more because volume is still the gap that no amount of engineering closes on its own? Which side of that pit lane do you think decides the next 2 years? Drop your honest read in the comments. I want to see where people land on this. We're going to follow SMIC's capacity allocation and Cambricon's actual shipped volumes over the next 12 months. Subscribe so you see that update the moment it matters. The race is real, but the pit stop is where it gets decided.